never thought I'd be the type to share my story online. But here I am, 28 years old, staring at a future that feels like it's crumbling beneath me. Just a few weeks ago, I discovered something so staggering, so deeply cruel, that it left me questioning everything I thought I knew about family, love, and trust. My parents stole the $120,000 that my late grandparents had set aside for my MBA and gave it to my older sister Ashley so she and her fiancé could buy a house. That sentence still doesn't feel real. It feels like fiction, something that happens to other people in messy families on television dramas. Not mine, but it happened. And the more I replay it, the more I realize this betrayal didn't happen overnight. It was built, slowly, over decades of favoritism, silence, and being treated like I was always the second choice. My grandparents were incredible people, traditional, hardworking, and endlessly thoughtful. They lived in another state, so I didn't get to see them often, but every time we spoke, they made it clear how much they valued education. My grandmother would always say, "Education is the one thing no one can ever take away from you." It was her mantra, her promise. Now that promise is shattered. When she and my grandfather passed, their will was read. It seemed fair, at least on the surface. My parents inherited savings and the family home. Ashley received all of my grandmother's jewelry, some heirlooms, and sentimental pieces worth tens of thousands of dollars. And me? I was given a sizable education fund, $120,000, to pursue my MBA. It was stated clearly, the money was to be used solely for my education. My parents were named as the temporary custodians until I needed it. At the time, I felt so grateful. I had worked hard, graduated with honors, earned a respected job in a competitive industry, and now, thanks to my grandparents, I had a way forward. An MBA would be the next step. Every C-suite executive I admired had one. I had spent years preparing, researching schools, polishing my resume, maintaining an impeccable record. I was ready. And then, I asked about the fund. I had just started prepping my applications. I knew applying to top-tier MBA programs could cost thousands in fees alone, so I reached out to my parents for specifics. How much was available, where the account was, what steps I needed to access it. At first, they brushed me off. "Just focus on your applications," my mom said with a tight smile. "Don't worry about the money," my dad mumbled, eyes darting away. Then they changed the subject to Ashley and Nathan's house hunting journey, as if I hadn't just asked about my future. A week later, I brought it up again, more directly this time. I needed an answer. I deserved one. That's when they told me. "We used it for Ashley's house," my mother said flatly, as if she were telling me we ran out of milk. My dad chimed in, saying something about how it wasn't fair for me to get a free ride while Ashley was struggling under student loans. I couldn't breathe. They didn't ask. They didn't explain. They simply took what was never theirs to give and handed it to the golden child, because she needed it more. I stood there stunned. My life plan, my dreams, the trust my grandparents placed in me, it had all been stolen. And that was just the beginning. I wish I could say that finding out about the stolen fund was a one-time betrayal, that it came out of nowhere like some cruel accident. But the truth is, it was the final blow in a lifetime of being treated like I didn't matter. Ashley has always been the star in our family, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Even when I was little, I noticed the difference. I'd bring home perfect report cards, win awards, lead science fairs, and my parents would nod absently, barely looking up from their phones. Meanwhile, Ashley could flunk a midterm or skip a class and somehow be praised for finding herself. The worst part? I never stopped trying. I thought maybe if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, made myself useful enough, they'd see me. I became the overachiever, the problem solver, the good daughter. But instead of earning their admiration, I became convenient, easy to ignore, easy to dismiss. I didn't need their help, so they gave it to Ashley. I didn't need praise, so they showered it on her. I used to tell myself it wasn't a big deal, that maybe I was being too sensitive. But as I stood in front of them, hearing my mom casually explain how they gave away the money meant for my future, something inside me cracked. "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking. That money was for my education. It's in the will. You don't just get to give it away. My mother shrugged like she was tired of the conversation. Ashley needed it more. She and Nathan are trying to build a life together. You already have a good job. You'll figure it out. My father leaned back, arms crossed. You're smart. You've always landed on your feet. Ashley's the one who struggled. Struggled? Ashley changed majors 3 times, dropped out of college twice, and floated from job to job until she landed a kindergarten teaching position that barely covered her rent. Meanwhile, I had worked my way up from an entry-level position to senior project manager at one of the top firms in the city. I led a team of 15, managed multi-million-dollar accounts, and maintained a spotless record. And still, I was the one expected to figure it out. I reminded them, again, that the will was legally binding, that what they had done was embezzlement. They laughed. What are you going to do? My dad asked with a smirk. Sue us. You don't even have the money for a lawyer. You're being dramatic, my mom added. We're a family. This isn't some courtroom. This is real life. That's when it hit me. They never saw me as an equal, not as a daughter, not as a human being with dreams worth protecting. I was a tool, a reliable fallback, the one they could use to fix Ashley's messes, to patch the holes in their fantasy of a perfect family. I left their house that night shaking, not from anger, from heartbreak. All these years I had convinced myself I was just being overly sensitive, that if I kept being the good daughter, one day I'd be enough. But standing in that living room, listening to them justify what they had done, I finally saw the truth. To them, I was never the daughter worth investing in. I was the backup plan. And now I was done playing that role. I didn't sleep that night. My body was still, but my mind was screaming. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, smirking, smug, certain they'd get away with it. My mother's dismissive shrug, my father's cruel little laugh. You'll figure it out. I had figured it out, all right. I figured out I had never really been part of their plans, just a line on a spreadsheet they could erase when it was convenient. By morning, the weight in my chest had calcified into something sharp and steady. Resolve. I got to the office before anyone else. The early morning sun filtered through the blinds as I sat in my cubicle, rereading the emails my grandparents had sent me over the years, always signed off with love, always with a note about how proud they were of my determination. It reminded me of who I was doing this for, not just myself, but for them. They had trusted my parents, and now I had to be the one to make things right. I knocked on Mr. Thompson's door. He'd been my manager since my very first day, but more than that, he'd been a mentor. He was tough but fair, the kind of man who remembered where you started and pushed you to go further. When I stepped into his office that morning, I didn't even have to fake a smile. He took one look at me and said, "What's wrong?" And so for the first time, I told someone everything. The embezzled MBA fund, the favoritism, the years of being dismissed, the disbelief that my own parents could do this and laugh in my face. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush me. He just listened. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You're stronger than you think, and you're not doing this alone." Mr. Thompson made a call right then and there to a friend of his at Wilson & Partners, one of the top law firms in the city, corporate and estate law, the real deal. He also asked, "Do you have anyone in the family who isn't like them?" That's when I remembered Uncle Jake, my dad's cousin, a self-made businessman. We didn't talk often, but I remembered how, at family events, he'd quietly slip me a card and say, "Call me if you ever need anything." I used to think it was just polite talk. Now I understood. I messaged him on LinkedIn, half expecting it to go ignored. Instead, my phone rang 10 minutes later. Stealing from their own daughter? Uncle Jake's voice was like steel. That crosses a line. I always knew they played favorites, but this? Number, we're not letting this go. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. By noon, he had assembled a team. Estate lawyers, a forensic accountant, and a legal assistant who immediately began reviewing the trust documents. Uncle Jake offered to cover all the legal expenses. "This isn't just about money," he said. "This is about honoring your grandparents' wishes and making sure they never do this to anyone else again." Something shifted in me that day. For so long, I'd been the quiet one, the overlooked daughter, the sensible girl who never made waves. They thought that made me weak, that I wouldn't fight back. But they were wrong, because I'd learned how to endure, and now I was learning how to rise. I thought the hardest part would be deciding to fight back. I was wrong. The hardest part was seeing just how deep the betrayal went. Within days, Uncle Jake's legal team had pulled together documents that made my stomach turn. The forensic accountant, this quiet man with rimless glasses and a voice barely louder than a whisper, uncovered that my parents hadn't just dipped into the MBA fund during a moment of desperation. They had been transferring money, quietly, systematically, for months before my grandmother even passed away. They weren't just careless, they were calculated. They had used their power of attorney to move funds from my grandmother's estate into accounts Ashley controlled. Not just my MBA fund, but smaller trusts my grandmother had created for future investments, accounts meant for charitable donations, and even one set aside for medical expenses in case she fell ill again. It was theft, plain and simple, and I was done giving them the benefit of the doubt. That Friday, their lawyer called, smug, measured, trying to smooth it all over. He suggested a family settlement where my parents would agree to cover some of my MBA costs if I dropped the lawsuit. Uncle Jake's voice was ice cold when he replied, "You will either return every cent with interest and penalties, or you'll face criminal charges. No negotiation, no compromise." I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. For once, I was not the one pleading. I was not the one being asked to shrink. And that shift, it was everything. The fallout came quickly. My parents began blowing up my phone, emails, voicemails, even messages through extended family. "How could you do this to us?" my mother cried in one voicemail. "We were going to help you eventually." My dad wrote an email accusing me of ruining the family's name and warned me that outsiders don't care about loyalty. I forwarded everything to Uncle Jake's team. He read one of the emails, smirked, and said, "Funny how they talk about loyalty now, when they had no problem stabbing you in the back." Then, as if that wasn't enough, Ashley reached out. Her email was a full page of feigned innocence. "I didn't know where the money came from," she wrote. "Mom and Dad said they had savings. I never would have accepted it if I knew it was yours." It was almost laughable. She didn't offer to return the money. She didn't ask what she could do to fix it. She just wanted me to use common sense and find a family solution. I showed Uncle Jake. "Good," he said. "Now we have written proof that she knew it wasn't hers and didn't care until it got messy." That weekend, I moved into a friend's apartment. My parents had shown up at my building, pounding on the lobby doors, trying to talk their way past the front desk. Security had already been briefed and refused to let them in, but I didn't want to take chances. Uncle Jake also hired a private investigator to track and document any further attempts at contact. If my parents tried to reach me again, it would only build our harassment case. I used to think I had no power in this family, that I was just the overlooked daughter, smart, yes, but forgettable, disposable. But now I had lawyers, I had truth, and for the first time I had the upper hand. And that quiet girl they used to laugh at? She was gone. 3 weeks later, I sat in a cold courtroom, heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the whisper of papers and the click of polished shoes on marble floors. I hadn't slept the night before. No matter how much I told myself I was ready, nothing prepares you for facing the people who raised you, people who should have protected you when you know they betrayed you. My parents sat across the aisle, barely looking at me. My mother wore a pastel cardigan like she was headed to Sunday brunch. My father, stiff in his blazer, wore that same smug look I remembered from every childhood argument, like he still believed no one would ever hold him accountable. But this time, things were different. Uncle Jake sat beside me, calm, composed, with a leather-bound folder thicker than my childhood scrapbook. Our legal team took their places while my parents' third lawyer, yes, their third, tried to keep his composure. I could see it in his face. He had no idea how deep this mess went, and he was about to find out. The judge called the hearing to order, and our attorney began by laying out the timeline, how the MBA fund was clearly designated in my grandparents' will, how my parents had been legally entrusted to safeguard it, and how they began draining it long before I even mentioned applying to school. Then came the bombshells. One by one, the forensic accountant presented evidence. Bank transfers, altered documents, emails between my parents discussing how to move things around quietly. Even a fabricated letter they tried to slip into the estate records, claiming I had agreed to give the money to Ashley as a gift. I didn't know whether to scream or cry. My father's face turned pale as the lies unraveled. My mother's hands fidgeted in her lap, her jaw tightening with every passing minute. And then the final piece dropped, a statement from my grandmother's caregiver. She had kept a journal, notes on everything, and in that journal, she had documented my grandmother repeatedly reminding my parents, even in her final months, that the money was for my education and mine alone. She had begged them not to misuse it. They did anyway. The judge paused the hearing for a break. My parents' lawyer, now visibly shaken, pulled them aside. I watched them whisper and argue, my mother waving her hands, my father red in the face. When court resumed, the lawyer addressed the judge with a weak request for clarification of the will's language. Our attorney didn't even blink. Your Honor, we have not only a signed will, but video testimony from the estate lawyer who drafted it, and now caregiver records verifying the decedent's intent. There is no ambiguity, only betrayal. The judge nodded. Proceed. That day was the first time I saw real fear in my parents' eyes. Ashley wasn't even in court, but her silence spoke volumes. After receiving a copy of the lawsuit, she had hired her own attorney. Apparently, the risk to her teaching career was now very real. Her mortgage lender had also been alerted to the fraudulent source of the down payment. The house she bragged about, it was now under review for seizure. Every lie they told, every time they dismissed me as the sensible one, was now circling back with a vengeance. And sitting there, in that courtroom, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter anymore. I felt like justice. If watching my parents unravel in court had been satisfying, watching Ashley's perfect little world begin to crack open was something else entirely, something I didn't know I needed until it happened. It started with a call from Uncle Jake late one evening. "You might want to sit down for this," he said, his tone oddly calm. "Ashley's school board is conducting a full review. They just notified her attorney." I paused, unsure how to respond. Ashley, who'd spent years basking in unearned praise. Ashley, who smiled smugly through every dinner while our parents brushed off my achievements like dust. Ashley, who now stood in the spotlight, not for her excellence, but for her complicity. It turned out that the school where she worked as a principal had caught wind of the legal proceedings, particularly the fact that the down payment on her house came from stolen funds. Ethics boards don't take kindly to that. The board scheduled an emergency meeting and word spread quickly through the school community. By the end of the week, parents were pulling their kids from the waiting list. Teachers whispered in the lounge, and Ashley? She sent me a long, desperate email. She didn't apologize. Not really. Instead, she begged. "I didn't know where the money came from," she claimed. "I thought Mom and Dad just saved it for us. Please, don't let this ruin everything I've worked for." Funny, she never seemed too worried about what I had worked for. My education, my future, my trust, all gone, because she didn't bother to ask any questions when a six-figure gift fell into her lap. I forwarded the email to our legal team. Meanwhile, Nathan, her charming fiancé, the one who always laughed too loudly at my parents' favoritism, had his own reckoning. Uncle Jake's forensic accountant flagged several inconsistencies in the couple's loan paperwork, false income declarations, misrepresented assets, and Nathan, who co-signed everything, couldn't plead ignorance. The mortgage lender launched an internal investigation. Their approval was under review. Suddenly, the dream home they'd proudly posted about on Facebook looked more like a house of cards. One strong wind and it would collapse, and it did. Nathan, under growing pressure, started pulling away. According to a cousin who still talks to Ashley, they fought constantly. He accused her of dragging him into this. She accused him of not standing by her. 1 week later, he moved out. Their engagement was called off. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, but what I felt was grief, not for them, but for every time I had tried to earn love from people who only saw me as convenient. For every celebration of theirs I sat through while shrinking myself in the background. Forever you'll understand one day that my parents used to excuse their blatant favoritism. Now they were understanding. And it was too late. My parents? They were reeling. Church friends had cut ties. My mother was asked to step down from her bridge club. My father's golf membership was suspended. The quiet judgment of their community hurt them more than any courtroom ever could. And through it all, I said nothing, because for once, silence was power. Uncle Jake reminded me again and again, they're facing consequences of their own making. You're not responsible for the fallout. You're responsible for reclaiming what they tried to steal. He was right. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing validation. I wasn't trying to fix what I didn't break. I was just watching as the truth did what it always does. It rose to the surface and stripped every illusion bare. The courtroom was quiet, too quiet for what was about to happen. I sat between my attorney and Uncle Jake, trying to steady my breath. The scent of polished wood, old paper, and cold air wrapped around me like static. The judge, a woman with steely eyes and a reputation for zero tolerance on fiduciary misconduct, had reviewed every page of evidence we had submitted. Now it was her turn to speak, and when she didn't hold back. This case, she began, her voice clear and unshaken, is not merely a matter of financial wrongdoing, it is a betrayal. A calculated, deliberate betrayal, not just of your daughter, but of your own parents' final wishes. That kind of behavior, she paused, locking eyes with my parents, shows a startling degree of moral decay. I could see my mother squirm in her chair, her usual confidence cracking. My father stared ahead, jaw clenched, his once proud posture visibly slumped. This wasn't the outcome they expected. They thought I'd fold, thought I'd be too embarrassed to fight back. But today their laughter from weeks ago, when I first threatened legal action, had been replaced with silence. Dead, humiliating silence. The judge continued, her words slicing through the room like glass. It is the finding of this court that the defendants not only violated the conditions of the trust left by the deceased, but did so with full knowledge and intent. Evidence provided by the forensic accountant and corroborated by multiple testimonies proves an extended pattern of deceit and manipulation. Then came the hammer. They are hereby ordered to return the entire MBA fund of $120,000 to the plaintiff, with an additional 11% interest accruing from the date of the first unauthorized transfer. Furthermore, due to the calculated nature of their actions, they are ordered to pay punitive damages totaling $100,000 and cover all legal fees incurred by the plaintiff. My heart raced. I gripped the edge of my seat. Uncle Jake placed a hand on my shoulder, steady, proud, unshaking, but it wasn't over. In addition, the judge said, the court finds that continued contact from the defendants constitutes harassment. The defendants are to have no direct or indirect communication with the plaintiff. Any further attempts will be treated as a violation of this court order and may result in criminal charges. My mother let out a small gasp, her mascara-streaked face twisting into something unfamiliar. Shock, maybe. Or fear. My father just dropped his head into his hands. That was the moment it hit me. Not just the legal victory, but the emotional one. I had been the sensible one, the daughter who kept quiet, who swallowed her hurt to keep peace, who was always just fine. And now? I had taken them to court, and won. They lost everything that day. To cover the damages and interest, they had to sell the family home, the very one they inherited from my grandparents, the home I was supposed to never step foot in again. It was auctioned within weeks. Their golf memberships were revoked. My mother was asked to resign from her church leadership role. The bridge club that once welcomed her? Gone. Upper middle-class suburbia had turned its back on them. Justice had a funny way of showing up when you least expected it, but exactly when it mattered most. And me, I didn't cry. I didn't gloat. I simply stood, nodded at the judge, and walked out of that courtroom with my head high. Because for the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of being overlooked. I was walking in the light of being seen and respected. The courtroom verdict was only the beginning. Ashley and Nathan's dream home, the house my MBA fund was stolen to help purchase, became a symbol of everything wrong, everything dishonest. Within days of the judgment, the mortgage company launched a formal investigation after being notified that the down payment had been made using misappropriated funds. Uncle Jake's legal team had flagged it, and suddenly Ashley and Nathan's newly minted status as homeowners began to unravel. Their loan was revoked, the mortgage was voided, and the house? It was no longer theirs to claim. I can't lie, there was a certain poetic justice in it. They had stolen my future to buy a facade of stability, and now the bricks of that illusion were falling one by one. Ashley's troubles didn't stop there. The school board at her private kindergarten, where she had once proudly served as principal, scheduled an emergency review. Word had spread quickly through the community. Ethics concerns were raised, and questions about her moral fitness to lead young children became impossible to ignore. She was suspended pending investigation. By the end of the week, she was asked to resign. The board's decision wasn't emotional. It was clinical, decisive, and unanimous. Loss of public trust was the reason cited in their formal statement. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Ashley had been the golden child, the pride of my parents, the one who could do no wrong. Now the same community that once praised her was turning away. Nathan wasn't spared either. The zoo, where he worked as head zookeeper, placed him on administrative leave. His name was now attached to documents that possibly contained falsified financial information, co-signatures on the loan application that the investigators were combing through line by line. I heard through extended family that the tension between them boiled over quickly. They fought constantly, Ashley accusing Nathan of not protecting her reputation, Nathan claiming Ashley dragged him into this mess. And just like that, the engagement that had once been a source of so much celebration in our family was quietly falling apart. Nathan moved out of their apartment the following week. Ashley stayed behind, surrounded by packing boxes and unanswered calls. From what I've heard, she's been job hunting, with no success. The local teaching community is close-knit, and no one wants to be associated with scandal, even if it wasn't criminal on her part. The taint of impropriety lingers. Watching their world collapse wasn't something I enjoyed, but it did feel like closure. For once, the people who had benefited from my pain were forced to sit in it themselves. But the most sobering moment came when I realized this. Ashley wasn't the only one losing something. My parents, who once saw her as their legacy, were now watching that legacy rot in real time. The daughter they had sacrificed everything for, my future, their integrity, our family's reputation, was now unemployed, disgraced, and alone. Uncle Jake said it best when he called me one night. They bet everything on the wrong horse, and now they're watching the whole barn burn down. I didn't gloat. I didn't dance in their ashes. I just quietly kept living, because while they were busy falling apart, I was finally coming together. And that, more than anything, is the real justice. The court's judgment hit my parents like a wrecking ball. Not only were they ordered to pay back the $120,000 they stole from my MBA fund, but they also owed double that amount in punitive damages. With interest, attorney fees, and penalties, they now faced a financial nightmare that no amount of denial could cushion. The house, the one they inherited from my grandparents, the symbol of their pride and stability, was the first to go. Uncle Jake's legal team didn't waste time. Within weeks, their assets were frozen. Forced to sell, my parents packed up decades of memories in silence and moved to a cramped apartment on the outskirts of town, far from the manicured lawns and country clubs they once flaunted. The shift wasn't just financial, it was social. My father, once a fixture at local business luncheons, had to retire early. He'd built a reputation on family values and financial wisdom, yet now he was a man publicly exposed for stealing from his own daughter. His phone stopped ringing. Former colleagues turned cold. No one wanted to be associated with him. Rumor had it, he was even quietly removed from a community board he'd served on for over a decade. My mother fared no better. She used to love telling people about her bridge club and church committees, always seated at the center of gossip and admiration. But as the truth spread about what she did and how she laughed in my face when I threatened legal action, people started whispering. Then, they stopped inviting her. The Bridge Club asked her to step down as treasurer. Her name was quietly removed from event rosters. Even her church, a place she once called her second home, asked her to resign from leadership roles. She tried to spin the story, of course. claimed I had overreacted, said the media and lawyers had blown it out of proportion. But it didn't matter. People weren't buying it. Because even in tight-knit communities, there's one thing people won't forgive: betraying your own child. The social collapse was hard to watch, but part of me found peace in it. For years, I was the one struggling in silence, feeling like I didn't matter. Now they were forced to sit in the discomfort they so casually handed me my whole life. And Ashley, who once walked into rooms as if the world owed her comfort, suddenly found herself in unfamiliar territory: accountability. Her dream home was no longer a dream. When the mortgage company discovered that the down payment was funded by stolen money, they revoked the loan approval. The school where she worked didn't take kindly to scandal. A principal accused of being involved in financial misconduct was a liability. The board convened and, in a unanimous vote, decided to terminate her contract. The reason? Ethical concerns and a breach of community trust. Ashley's fall was swift and public. Nathan didn't fare much better. Even though he hadn't stolen the money himself, he had co-signed documents with misleading information. His employer, our local zoo, placed him on administrative leave pending a full ethics review. Their once stable relationship couldn't withstand the pressure. The fights started, then the silence, then the blame. Nathan moved out of their apartment a week later. I didn't celebrate any of this. I didn't pop champagne or dance in triumph, because justice doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it just feels like finally breathing after years of suffocation. But one thing was clear: they thought I'd stay silent forever. They thought being the quiet daughter meant being powerless. They were wrong. If there was ever a moment that defined the collapse of the illusion my parents had spent years crafting, it was the family meeting Uncle Jake organized. He didn't call it a reunion. He didn't sugarcoat it. He simply invited the extended family to hear the truth, without spin, without lies. And they came. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people who had once sent me awkward holiday cards or stayed quiet at family dinners when my parents overshadowed me. This time, they listened. Uncle Jake came prepared like it was a boardroom negotiation. He brought charts, copies of financial documents, the legal timeline. Not to shame, but to show, to confront years of manipulation with undeniable evidence. My parents sat stiffly at the end of the long dining table, surrounded by people they had always believed were on their side. Uncle Jake started with a simple statement: "You all deserve to know what really happened." He walked everyone through the forged paperwork, the misuse of the power of attorney before my grandmother even passed, the forged family messages claiming I had gifted the MBA fund to Ashley. He read excerpts from my grandmother's care diary, handwritten entries describing her intentions for my education, intentions my parents had deliberately ignored. There were audible gasps. One aunt covered her mouth. A cousin looked at my mother, horrified. But what really broke the room was when Uncle Jake played the voicemail, my mother sobbing to me, begging for forgiveness, still insisting she had done it for the family. And then he said something I'll never forget. "Stealing from your child is not a mistake. It's a choice. Repeating it, lying about it, and laughing in her face when she speaks up, that's who you are." For the first time, my parents didn't argue. They didn't shout or defend themselves. They just sat there, silent, cornered, ashamed. The lies had finally caught up, and the final blow? My mother's own sister, Aunt Meredith, stood up and said, her voice trembling, "I don't even recognize who you are anymore." That shattered whatever support they had left. After the meeting, several relatives approached me with tears in their eyes. Some apologized for not seeing it sooner. Some admitted they had believed the lies, that I had been difficult, cold, or ungrateful. I didn't hold it against them. For so long, I'd kept my distance, thinking silence was safer. But now that the truth was in the open, I felt something I hadn't in years: validation. My parents left the house that day with their heads down. They didn't speak to anyone. They didn't look back. Uncle Jake hugged me afterward and said, "You didn't just reclaim your money. You reclaimed your voice." And he was right. It wasn't just about the $120,000. It was about everything they tried to take from me: my confidence, my identity, my worth. That day, In front of the very people they once rallied against me, the truth finally stood on its own, and for once, they had no choice but to listen. The final court hearing came on a cold Thursday morning in early March. I remember standing outside the courthouse, watching the wind blow through the trees lining the parking lot. It was strangely quiet for such a big day, the kind of day that could mark the end of a years-long wound, or reopen it. Inside the courtroom, my parents sat across from me. They looked smaller than I remembered. My mother's hair, once carefully curled and full of pride, hung limp at her shoulders. My father, who used to walk into every room like he owned it, now looked like a man who'd lost the deed. Their new attorney, the third one they'd hired, sat tensely, flipping through documents and whispering frantically. Meanwhile, Uncle Jake sat beside me, calm as ever, flanked by the legal team he had personally funded. He leaned over and whispered, "Whatever happens, this ends today. You win by walking away with your dignity intact." The judge entered and the room fell into silence. Her tone was firm, unwavering. She spoke slowly, carefully, her words slicing like cold steel. This case isn't just about stolen money. It's about a betrayal of trust so deep it shakes the foundation of what family is meant to be. Then came the decision. My parents were ordered to return the $120,000 MBA fund in full, with accrued interest dating back to the first illegal withdrawal. On top of that, they were fined nearly double that amount in punitive damages. They were also responsible for paying every cent of the legal costs, including the forensic accounting that uncovered their deception. The final number? Just under $500,000. But the monetary judgment wasn't the part that broke them. It was the court's additional ruling, a formal written admission of their misconduct signed under penalty of perjury. A document that would be public record, a paper trail of their failure not just as fiduciaries, but as parents. I glanced over as the judge read out the sentence. My mother buried her face in her hands. My father stared at the floor like it might swallow him whole. And just like that, justice wasn't just symbolic, it was real. They were forced to sell the home they inherited from my grandparents, the house they used to brag about, the one they said they'd pass on to the right daughter someday. That house sold at a loss in a rushed market, just to cover part of the judgment. The rest? Uncle Jake ensured they couldn't hide a dime. Every bank account, every asset, every vehicle, frozen and accounted for. Socially, they were pariahs. Their neighbors stopped waving. Their church asked them to step down from their volunteer positions. The country club revoked my father's membership. And the bridge club my mother loved, they quietly asked her to resign as treasurer. For the integrity of the group. It wasn't revenge. It was reality catching up. Meanwhile, Ashley and Nathan were facing their own fallout. When the mortgage lender found out the down payment came from stolen funds, they revoked the loan. Their dream house was gone before they ever moved in. Ashley was forced to step down as principal due to a loss of community trust, and Nathan was placed on leave from the zoo. Last I heard, he'd moved out. The engagement didn't survive the scandal. My parents called a few more times. Letters came in the mail. Long, handwritten pleas filled with half-hearted apologies and thinly veiled guilt trips. I didn't respond, not because I was cold, but because I had nothing left to say. Some wounds can't be healed by words, especially when the people who cut them never believed they'd bleed you dry. And that courtroom? It didn't just return my money, it returned my name. My dignity, my place in the family history, not as the afterthought, but as the one who had the courage to say enough. It's been 6 months since that final court hearing. I now live in a high-rise apartment in a gated community downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlook the skyline, and every morning I wake up with sunlight pouring across the hardwood floors. It's quiet here. No guilt trips, no shouting, no shame lurking behind every phone call. The building has a doorman. He knows my name, and more importantly, he knows the 2 names I gave him not to let through the doors. My parents. Their pictures sit behind the desk in a do not admit file, alongside the names of people who once thought they could take everything from me and walk away untouched. They were wrong. Sometimes I sit by the window, coffee in hand, and think about how far I've come. From the girl who was always told to figure it out while her sister got praise and privilege, to the woman who fought for her future and won. But justice, as satisfying as it is, doesn't erase the ache. It doesn't undo the years of being overlooked. It doesn't silence the echoes of every time I was told to lower my expectations, to be the responsible one, the selfless one, the invisible one. Still, something unexpected happened in the fallout. I got letters from cousins, from old friends of my grandparents, from neighbors who had heard whispers of the scandal and wanted me to know they'd always wondered why I disappeared after high school. One of them said, "Your grandmother talked about you like you were made of gold. I'm glad you never let anyone tarnish that." I cried when I read that one. Uncle Jake has become more than family. He's a mentor, a protector, and maybe the first adult in my life who never saw me as second best. He introduced me to colleagues in his business network, opened doors I never knew existed, and once said, "You've got a mind for leadership, but more importantly, you've got a spine. That's rarer." My job has been more than supportive. Mr. Thompson, my boss, and the man who vouched for me when I needed it most, submitted a glowing recommendation that landed me a spot in the MBA program of my dreams. I start next semester. They even offered to hold an executive role for me when I finish. And the MBA fund, fully restored, plus interest, plus damages. I didn't just get my education back. I got my voice back. As for my parents, they live in a modest apartment now, on the edge of town, not far from the zoo where Nathan used to work. From what I've heard, my mother rarely leaves the house. My father spends hours at a coffee shop, staring out the window. Maybe they're haunted by what they lost, not the money, but their place in the story. Because this story, my story, no longer includes them as the protagonists. They became the lesson, not the legacy. And Ashley, she tried to reach out once more, an email filled with vague apologies and pleas for a conversation, just the two of us. I didn't respond, because some bridges are meant to burn, especially the ones built on betrayal. I think about my grandmother often, her handwritten cards, her quiet faith in me, her voice saying, "Education is the one thing no one can ever take away from you." She was right, and now with every step I take forward, I carry her with me, not as a memory of what was lost, but as proof of what can be rebuilt. I wasn't the daughter they bragged about, but I became the woman they'll never forget, not because of what I gave, but because of what I reclaimed, my name, my future, my peace.